Good morning, class. We are at week 7. So exciting. Almost done. I'm sure you're getting kind of overwhelmed with all the things that are wrapping up all at once. Just so you're aware, a couple housekeeping items. We have course evaluations that probably have been sent out to you through your CBU email. Sorry, if you would like to receive 10 extra credit points for those course evals, you can take the course evaluation. I don't see what you say or anything of that nature, so please feel free to be honest. That's important. Um, and then just email me at my CBU email that you took the evaluation so I can give you points for that. Also, for week 8, there will be no discussion board. I know you're all wrapping up your capstones, and I know I'm not the only course. And so I just don't like having a discussion board also week 8. So I made that unavailable. So if you're trying to log on to your discussion board and you're like, why isn't it working? That is why it's not working for week 8. However, we're on week 7. So we do have a discussion board this week. I will be grading last week's discussion boards. I hope you found that content helpful and just a great way to check out different insight into subject matter. This week, we'll be talking about infidelity, which might be kind of hard for some of you based on your own personal experiences and or being raised in an environment where infidelity was an issue. And so if this strikes a chord with you, again, please be mindful of how we respond to one another and communicate with one another in our discussion board threads. But also, the program requires you all to do 24 hours of your own personal psychotherapy. And as you go through courses and you learn things about family dynamics or you learn things about um, just different patterns in unhealthy cycles, please utilize your 24 hours of psychotherapy to work through some of your own personal things. Because again, that's how we have change, that's how we grow, and that's how we work on not having countertransference potentially with clients, because we're working through our own stuff, because we all have things. And so I just can't reassure you or encourage you enough to take a look at that. Okay. So we're talking about infidelity and in a marriage context, really, but this could even apply to somebody who's not married, but in a relationship. And there's different ways infidelity can come about. Now, when couples come into my office and they speak of an affair, yes, it's never okay to have an affair, especially if you're in a monogamous relationship. However, affairs don't usually happen in perfect relationships, right? And so usually there's some level of a dynamic going on in the marriage that left a room for there to be an affair. That again doesn't excuse behavior, doesn't make it okay, but it's just not all one person. And I know that's really hard, especially for some of you hearing this who have been betrayed. That you're like, well, I didn't deserve that. Of course not. Like, nobody deserves to be cheated on. However, like, usually if you're being honest with yourself, a person could say like, yeah, we were very distant. There was no intimacy. We argued all the time. I belittled the person, whatever. There was things going on in the relationship that weren't healthy. We had kids. We lost sight of each other. We didn't even spend time together. Like, whatever. There's a lot of different variables, but usually it's not like our marriage was totally perfect. I was completely satisfied. My partner was completely satisfied and it happened. I would say that's very rare. Okay. So this talks about a couple different authentic human sexuality. This Balsic, this talks about a couple different reasons why there could be an affair, unequal power. So one person has more power and control in the marriage, they're likely to gain in of an extramarital affair. So like one person feels like they have more rights and abilities to, again, using the word power to go and do that. Females who lacked equality in their marital relationships were more likely to desire and engage in extramarital sexual behavior. um so meaning like they didn't feel like it was, I guess, fair, and so they're looking for something else. These findings are consistent with equity theory, which predicts higher rates of extramarital sex in marriages where there is unequal power. The basic idea of this theory is that people need to feel they are getting as much out of the relationship as they are putting into it. Most people keep mental tabulations to figure out whether the benefits outweigh the sacrifice they make. Under-benefited partners engaged in extramarital sex earlier in their marriage and with more partners than those who feel equally treated. Women who felt that they were not getting all that they deserved in their marriage were more likely to consider extramarital sexual involvement as an acceptable behavior. So, that might be one reason. Maybe you'll have clients who are in situations where you're like, oh, this might be the reason. Situational factors, infidelity is often related to situational factors like opportunity, coworkers, traveling away from home. So place of work is a primary context for affairs with coworkers who are emotionally connected and approached as alternative partners to spouses. So again, I see this a lot of times in a work environment. People joke, oh, this is my work wife or my work husband, whatever. And not to say when people joke like that, that automatically means they're having an affair. However, I think it's very easy when you're working with someone all day long for 40 hours a week, maybe even traveling, all these things, you get an emotional connection with that person. And, we have different levels of, I don't want to say levels, different types of ways of having an affair. And I think one of them, it usually starts with some level of an emotional connection. I would say for women, that's probably where it starts, is feeling emotionally connected to someone. And then it doesn't take much longer after that to have potentially a physical relationship that maybe a person is having, is relying more on the emotional partner than they are to their actual spouse. And as this goes on, then there ends up being problems. Okay. And so that would be a situational affair. Lack of differentiation based on clinical research, extramarital sexual involvement on one's level of differentiation. This study suggests that spouses with low levels of differentiation tend to be fused. So again, that's where you have more of that codependency at one extreme or emotional cutoff. So they're either very close or very distant, which is that, when you look at codependency, that's that roller coaster that we see. They claim those who lack a healthy degree of differentiation are more vulnerable to extramarital affairs, and their tendency to confuse fusion with emotional closeness, and undifferentiated spouses tend to be overly dependent on each other for validation and self-definition. When that doesn't occur, it is very disconcerting, and the strong desire for validation makes extramarital affairs extremely attractive, which, again, the affair gives the impression that one is desirable, sexy, and admired, and becomes an escape route for new validation, like looking for something they're not getting because of the cycles of the relationship. And again, something new, something exciting, something not allowed, forbidden. It can be kind of hot for people, and it feels like you got those butterflies again and that excitement again, even though it's not necessarily good, and it can destroy your life and all the things. So, but we get sucked into that, right? Because it feels good. It feels good to be noticed. Everybody wants to be seen on some basic human level, wants to be seen, wants to feel noticed. And it's very easy in a marriage, especially over any sort of longevity, to not feel like you matter or that you're seen. And so I think these windows of opportunity happen, and then you're in this crossroads of what are you going to do based on maybe a lack of satisfaction in a marriage. Okay. Again, not okay, but those are some of the things that go on. So highly differentiated spouses do not fear. So that means highly differentiated. So you can see, you are independent people, as I describe when I talk about codependency from the book called Love is a Choice. They talk about codependency like being two railroad tracks. Healthy relationship like two railroad tracks. Unhealthy relationship is like Siamese twins and or that roller coaster I talk about. But a healthy relationship is like railroad tracks. You're two separate rails. You meet in the middle with the slats. Okay. So highly differentiated spouses do not fear losing themselves in the emotional closeness of the marriage because their solid sense of self frees them to love in more expressive and more valuable ways. Affairs occur more frequently among those who fear intimacy rather than those who desire to become more intimate with their spouse. Okay? So it is a moral choice, right? Even if you have no faith background and there's no religion attached to it, let's just say just values. Like, what do you value as a person? Choosing to have an affair when married, I believe, comes down to some, like, what is your moral compass, right? Um, so maybe you're very tolerable towards the possibility of having an affair, the opportunity for the affair, the presence of extramarital models. So, movies, TV, books, right? A time of mental rehearsing about how the affair will take place, the consumption of the affair. So again, the progression from thought to action. So where this went from just an idea to all the things, right? Um, that's there's a progression, right? Like I said, it doesn't normally just usually happen. Coveting or lusting after someone outside of the marriage harms everyone involved. The one who commits adultery shapes his or her character through the deceitful and unfaithful action. The abandoned spouse feels betrayed, angry, neglected, and confused about what's happening. The children are insecure as the sense and the distance and the disruption between their parents and the person involved in the affair remains uncertain about his or her place and future in the adulterer's life. Thoughts and action go together, says Jesus. We must not merely do right things, we must also desire the right things. When desire goes astray, and thought and action is soon to follow. Which is a really good point. Like, it doesn't take much once we kind of put ourselves there mentally for the behavior to follow. And again, even from a non-Christian context, I would say this, like, once you kind of get a thought in your mind, you start warming up to the idea, maybe start feeling like, I deserve this, I'm entitled to it, I don't get treated right, this person ignores me, I don't exist. You start believing those lies, the behavior won't be far off, especially if someone else is giving you attention and is seemingly interested, right? And these are the things we have to be careful of. These are warning signs. This is why we talk to couples. I actually just developed a couples course through my work, and it talks about kind of before we get to this place, right? Like, maybe couples aren't here yet. They haven't had experience in an affair yet, but there's this drift that's happening, right? Like, there's this drift that's happening that's leaving more and more space for this type of behavior. Maybe there's a lacking of emotional intimacy. Maybe there's a lacking of physical intimacy. Maybe, like, we're so caught up in our kids and all our kids have going on, we're not paying attention to the other person. And so as a result of this, there leaves more room for other people to fill in spaces. And so we just have to be mindful that really affairs can happen to anyone. I don't think anyone who has an affair who has an affair feels like, oh, when I got married and said my vows on my wedding day, I thought I was going to have an affair. I would say most people say, oh, I would never do that. But the reality is, by the grace of God, there go I. We're all capable of doing anything, any horrific thing in this world, any kind of sin, any kind of behavior. We are all capable. We are one step away from being anybody. And so if we aren't aware of that, then we could get ourselves in big trouble, right? The enemy is seeking and lurking to destroy, right? It happens all the time. And so we need to be on guard and be ready. And as clinicians, I love it when couples come in with small fires that we can pull out versus when it's already a forest fire. And then they're like, can you help me? And I'm like, sure. I mean, we are going to do our best, but like, we needed to be here like a year ago. You know what I mean? Like, not that that matters in that moment when they're coming before you, but like, it is so important for couples to start dealing with things before it gets so overwhelming. And there's so many more factors. So here's some myths about infidelity. The first myth is that since everybody is unfaithful, affairs are to be expected. That is not true. Affairs are not just to be expected. It's not a normal part of marriage. I think sometimes culture wants us to believe that, but that is not true. Second myth is that affairs are good for a marriage. No. I think good can come from an affair in the sense that God does not waste our suffering, and that I've seen really hard situations that people have faced due to infidelity and have come out on the other side stronger and better. But that doesn't mean that it was like something they would want to do again, or that it was a positive experience in their life, or whatever. I mean, as a result of the pain and the suffering, like, good has come of it, but like we didn't also need to go through that. You know what I mean? Another myth is that unfaithful partners are the sexier spouses since they are seeking more sex than what is available in the marriage. Untrue. Like, it has nothing to do with that. Sex is not the primary reason to have an affair. The motivation usually is to bolster a lack of ego or sexual confidence. So, according to this study. The fifth myth is that the affair is the fault of the resolute, the faithful spouse. Not true, right? Not true at all. The sixth myth is that there is protection through ignorance of a spouse's affair. The truth is that affairs are fueled by secrecy and threatened by exposure. And the seventh myth is that that after an affair, divorce is inevitable, and that is also not true. And that is where there's great work if you really want to work with couples, especially if like maybe some of this has rings a bell with you because of your own personal experiences, or maybe something you experienced and as a result you went to therapy and you have great results and you really want to work with couples. Great. There's some great trainings out there. I think CBU sometimes offers it, but you can do it outside of Cal Baptist. It's emotional focused therapy, really works on when love feels threatened. And as a result of love feeling threatened, this is what happens in couples. And there's the demon dialogue or the demon dance. And, there's a book called Hold Me Tight by Ruth Johnson. She's like the mother of EFT. And you could read that book if you want. And if you really are interested in that, great couple work can come from there. Because yes, there is hope and there is restoration and reconciliation after affair, but it requires a lot of work. And it's not easy work because there's a lot of hurt and pain, but it is possible. An affair does not mean the nail in the coffin. It can, but it doesn't have to be that way. But it does require two people looking to work on the relationship and working on this pain and hurt and forgiveness of one another, and looking to what they're not who they were before, but who they're going to be now, because we're never going to be able to go back to who we were. And if we go back to who we were, it led to an affair. So we need to focus on who we want to be. Yes, we need to change what got us in that situation so we don't repeat a pattern, but we need to focus on who we're going to be now, because there's no going back. And that's what's hard. After we make hard decisions, and this is with a lot of hard decisions we can make in our lives, there's no going back, right? And there's grace and mercy, and God has enough mercy for our mess. Amen, right? But there's enough grace and there's enough mercy that God has for us, of course. And I'm thankful for that. And there's forgiveness and all those things. But for each other, we have to be conscientious. Like you can burn someone out if you keep burning them, right? And so, yes, affairs do lead to divorce, but they also could lead to reconciliation. But that does take a lot of work, and it does need the work of both partners. If one partner doesn't want to do the work, then we're not doing the work. I mean, it's hard. You can't work on a relationship you can only work on yourself, but I mean, that may not change the relationship. I hope you found this helpful. I hope this insight encourages you. And maybe if this is something you really want to work on, you start looking into some of these things, because a lot of these special trainings for working with certain types of people are significantly cheaper as before you're licensed. So think about it, look into it. It might be a great thing for you to do. I hope you guys have a great week.